Hello everyone, this is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore. Welcome to the MuseScore Café. So, this is my regular series where I talk about some aspect of making music using MuseScore, and we have to chat about it, and you can give your comments and questions and things about what I'm talking about. And today, I've chosen to talk about customization a little bit, and I'll tell you about why in a moment. But first, give you my commercial announcement. I'm on a different computer today. I got myself a new computer, and that's part of why I picked this topic. So I can't, when I tried to, I realized that I'm not logged in to YouTube right now to be able to post the link. So I'm going to try to do it on my phone here to my school. But y'all know my school, right? It's where you can get all sorts of great courses on using MuseScore and on music in general. So I'm just going to type that link in here while the music keeps running. And then we'll be in business. Mastering. Yeah, I'm not good at typing on the mobile phone, especially while I'm talking. MuseScore.com. Okay. Hopefully that link works. And if it doesn't, you know the drill. You can find it. All right. So welcome, everyone. And so mostly on account of the fact that, as we often see during these sessions while I'm streaming, it's hard for my system to keep up. And that's true in general, but I decided to give myself a better fighting chance by upgrading a bit. And I want to talk about what I upgraded to and why, and then I'll talk about how that, how I've then set up my system to be as familiar to me as possible. So first of all, what I actually have here is another Chromebook. Y'all maybe remember that I mostly am using a Chromebook. I do have a number of Windows machines and other Linux machines, but I'm mostly using a Chromebook and running MuseScore as a Linux app. Just because I like how Chrome OS works. It's very simple, lightweight, and I generally like it. And so, for instance, when I set up this Chromebook, all I have to do is log in, and pretty much everything is set up exactly as it was on my other Chromebook, except the Linux apps. Those are the things that I have to set up manually. So that's why I had to go through my customization process. But MuseScore does allow you to transfer a lot of your customizations over, so that you can kind of reuse those. If you've set up one system the way you want and you want to set up another system the same way, you don't have to do everything manually. So I'll talk about that process also, and I'll talk about the process of how I actually set up the customizations. So, by the way, as far as the particular model I'll mention is ASUS. I don't even know how you say it. ASUS. I've seen that brand name around for years, never owned one before. So, yes, happy birthday to me. It is, tomorrow is my birthday, and so this was a early birthday present for myself. So, the deal is, because when I do these live streams, and not just live streams, but in general, I don't like the noise of fans on a computer. I don't like the fan noise, and I also don't like that most of the computers that have had moving parts, like a hard drive or fans, that's been the first thing to fail. So I've really, been on a kick the last few years. I don't buy systems that have fans in them or other moving parts. So this automatically limits your options as far as, which processors can be in your computer. And so what I really wanted was one of the more powerful systems I could get that was fanless. And because, if the best option had been a Windows computer, I would have gone that way. I just don't know Mac OS, so I wouldn't have done that. But the most powerful fanless Windows computers are not up to where this one is. This one is using an 11th gen Intel i5, I think, and I don't think there's any fanless Windows computers more powerful than that. So this Chromebook was actually my best option, which is good because I said I just like the experience also. So it's about the most powerful. Yes, I could have gotten an i7, but then that's a lot more expensive and harder to find. This version I was able to get easily. So It's a relatively quick machine, but as a fanless version of the processor, it's not as quick as some. So anyhow, that's what you will now be seeing me using. So I want to show you what my default workspace looks like here. My oh my gosh, your birthday tomorrow too. Wow, that's great, Dean. And as far as famous musicians, Michel Legrand, that's the musician I know, songwriter. If you're not familiar, look him up. You probably know some of his songs. Michel, like French, Michel. But what we're looking at is my default setup, and it's different from what you're used to seeing. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the how I set this up, and then I'll talk about the transfer process first because that's actually simpler to talk about. This here is a workspace I created. See, it says editing up in the upper right corner. My editing workspace, as you can see, has only a single toolbar here. It eliminated toolbar buttons that I never use, like all those duration ones. I use the keyboard shortcuts for that, right? I use keyboard shortcuts for the voice buttons. I use keyboard shortcut for tie, for flipping stems. The only things I don't use keyboard shortcuts for so much are the accidentals because there weren't ones defined by default. I went and customized some pretty recently, actually, but they're not ingrained in me, and I didn't bother with the double flat and double sharp. So I have those on here. I have the note input drop down menu on here so that I can access all the different modes, even though I almost never use anything other than the standard note input mode. But anyhow, so the editing toolbar, by eliminating the editing workspace, by eliminating some of the icons that I don't use, I was able to get it all onto one toolbar and save some space that way. I also right now have the inspector closed, but I can reopen that with a keyboard shortcut. F8 reopens the inspector. So I created this editing workspace. I also created a workspace I call presentation. And in my presentation workspace, you can see there's no toolbar at all except for this kind of vertical one on the side. And the vertical one on the side is, I could have tried to make that go away, but it's useful because it's how I can then easily go back to another workspace. But it also means when I record these videos or do live streams, if my face is in the lower right-hand corner, then this kind of prevents it from overlapping the score too much. So I've decided I like sacrificing a little space on the side here. Also, as a practical matter, that some of you might be aware of as you try to mimic some of the things that I'm going to be showing, this system, and I'm very happy this is the case, this system has a wide screen. It's not for everyone. So in other words, so was my old system. The aspect ratio is 16:9 as opposed to 3:2 or some of the other aspect ratios. Some computers have more squared off screens. This one is more rectangular, more stretched out, which really isn't great if you're primarily dealing with text, because that's not a convenient way for most people to deal with text, really long lines like that. It's good for watching movies, I guess. That's not the main thing I use it for, but I do like it in MuseScore because it gives me a lot of room left to write, especially when I close the side panels. And it allows me to do things like view documents side by side and have, here, let me drag. There we go. And have a fair amount of room to work with on both sides when I'm using documents side by side. And as you've seen in other episodes of the Café, I often use that side by side mode if I'm copying music from one score to another or trying to view a PDF. I'll make an image of the PDF to view in one window and then type in the music in the other window. So anyhow, I like the widescreen format, but it's not for everyone. But my specific customizations in how I've optimized things are really designed to take advantage of the fact, I guess, that I've got a lot of space left to write, not as much space up and down. So let me close that document side by side because I'm not going to want that. So in any case, I have these two different workspaces that I use pretty often. Presentation I use sometimes during the master class or recording videos for my courses when I don't need it. Like the MuseScore course, sure, I want to show all the toolbar buttons. But my theory courses, you don't need to see MuseScore. You want to focus on the music. So I use this presentation mode where basically you just see the music. So that's a workspace that I created. But the editing workspace is the one I use normally. And to create your own workspaces, you'll use this button here. So I'm going to go back to the advanced workspace. And this is the normal workspace that most of you are in, unless you're in the basic workspace. The basic workspace just has fewer buttons, fewer palettes, right? But it comes with a basic workspace and an advanced workspace. If you haven't already switched to advanced and you're wondering, hey, where's some stuff that I see Mark using? That's where it is. It's in the advanced workspace. So switch to the workspace you want to start with, and then you click the plus. And this lets you create a new workspace. And because this system, on my other system, I had created a Café workspace that I used for doing demonstrations, and then I could just delete it when I was done or reset it was done. So I'm going to do that, reset it when I'm done. So I'm going to do that here too. I'll hit the plus button, and then I'll create a new workspace, and I'll call it Café. And although I could put in the accent mark on the E, I'm a little afraid of what that's going to do to the file name, if that's going to do weird things. So I'm just going to do it this way. Now, when you create this workspace, in this dialog, I've given it a name, but I also want to look at these checkbars to see what I want to customize. Originally, the workspace feature was only about custom palettes. You could customize your palette and nothing else. Now, though, we allow you to customize other things as part of your workspace, but it's optional. And so you have to decide, like if you want to just have the same toolbar arrangement between all your workspaces, don't check the toolbar option. Then it'll just use the same toolbars that you use elsewhere. But if you want this workspace to have special toolbars, then check that option. Not checking the option doesn't mean no toolbars. It just means the same toolbars that MuseScore uses in the other workspaces. GUI Preferences is options in the Edit Preferences dialog that affect the interface, like font size for the interface itself, the icon sizes, the background color, things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and check that because why not? Menu bar, please don't check this. We put that option in there to say, okay, you could have a custom menu for your workspace and take out commands you don't use or add new commands. But then we didn't provide a way to actually customize it. So all this option does is lock you into the menu that exists right now. And then the next update to MuseScore that comes along, if it adds new menu items, you won't see them. So do not check this option. Now, there's not going to be any more updates to MuseScore 3 unless the world changes more drastically than I expect it to. Look at that. The word workspace got cut off here. I'm going to talk about why that probably happened a little later. So probably there won't be any more MuseScore 3 releases. MuseScore 4 will be the next one, and none of this, everything will change anyhow. But in general, don't check that box there. So GUI components means like, does it default to having the palettes open? Does it default to having the inspector open? Does it default to having the mixer open? I could go either way on those things, but they're really easy to open and close on command. So I think I'm going to leave this unchecked so that if I have the mixer already open and then I switch to my Café workspace, it'll stay open. I think that's how I'm going to want this to work. So, but that's how you can have it. If you know that you have a special workspace that you always want the mixer open in, then go ahead and check this and make sure you open the mixer. So, and then it'll stay open. So I've now created my Café workspace. And right now it looks exactly like the advanced workspace, but now is when the work of customizing it can begin. So there's all sorts of things you can do to customize this workspace, and I'm going to show you some of the things that you might do here. Oh, before I show about the customizations, I did say I wanted to talk about how I transferred it from computer to computer. The workspaces themselves get saved to a special folder. And then all you have to do is copy those files over to the corresponding special folder on your other computer. Now, the trick is that folder location varies between Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. So I can't tell you exactly where that folder is. In Windows, I think it's in App Data. In Mac OS, I have no idea, but I'll show you where it is in Linux, and then you can kind of get an idea. So if I open my terminal window in Linux, and I'm going to look at my, I have to remember where it is. I think it's in .local share MuseScore MuseScore 3. Local, share, MuseScore, MuseScore 3. This is the same folder that has, you see all these files, SCMT, all these numbers. You might recognize that. Those are the files that are left over after a crash. So you can tell how many times I've already had crashes on this system because that's how many scores were open. This is where you can see a couple of things. The shortcuts, any customizations you've done to your shortcuts are in here, and any workspaces. So this is like a separate folder here. So now I'm going to list that same folder with workspaces there, and you'll see there are my workspaces: Café workspace, editing workspace, presentation workspace. So all I do is copy these files over to the corresponding folder on my other machine. And then that's how I got my editing workspace there. So how do you delete a workspace? You could just delete this file. I think you would want to close MuseScore, then delete the file, but no, you don't have to do that. To delete a workspace, you go to View, Workspaces, and here you'll see this is where you can either delete it or reset it. Resetting the workspace removes your customizations. So remember, when I created this workspace, I started from the advanced workspace. Reset will restore it to being basically just a copy of the advanced workspace. Edit brings up this dialog so I can change my mind about what things I want included. So now that I have my Café workspace, and now if I want to copy it to another computer, you kind of have some idea of how to do that. The things that you can customize are really anything having to do with the toolbars or the palettes, or because I customized some of those UI preferences, UI related preferences. So that includes things like whether I use light theme or dark theme. Like if I want this to be a dark theme, great. Now this workspace is the dark theme, right? And then if I switch back to advanced, it will go back to light, except it didn't. So I'm obviously lying. I guess that one doesn't translate that way. I thought it would. Very surprising to me. Some things don't work. Some things in those preferences don't work right until you restart the program. So I'm actually going to do that and just see if that happens. So for news on version 4, check out the forum. There's an announcement forum, and every so often there's announcements with progress reports. We're probably looking at an alpha release in the next few weeks sometime. They're still feverishly working on the new playback system, and that's the main thing that's holding up the alpha release. So once there's an alpha release, that'll happen, and then we'll get feedback on that, and then there'll be a beta release once we've fixed most of the bugs, and then we'll get more feedback, and then have a final MuseScore 4 release. I don't know, summerish, who knows? It's just guesswork. So now I've got my dark theme in the Café. I want to see if now when I switch to advanced, no, it looks like it's just going to keep the dark theme. So that option didn't work the way I expected, and that's just the way it is. I don't like the dark theme. A lot of people do. But in any case, some of these options, like the icon size and the font that's used for your interface, these options get remembered and change from workspace to workspace. So that's what some of those options are. I guess I should at least try something else. I'm going to change my font face to something other than I'll change it to Roboto Medium. I don't know. So Roboto Medium is my font in this workspace, and you can see the font looks a little different now. I changed that in advanced, but if I go, I didn't mean to change it there. I meant to change it in Café, but that's okay. I'll go to Café now, and now you'll see my font is back to what it was before. So I think now I'll go back to advanced and reset that workspace because I didn't really mean to change it. So I'll say edit. No, not edit. View. It used to be under edit, I think. View, workspaces, reset workspace. And that apparently doesn't undo that change either. So some of these things, don't necessarily work the way ideally you might want them to, and that's just the way it is. So what was it before? It was open son. I'm going to pronounce it French-like. Open. Where are you? Nope, it's not that. Do you remember what font? Who remembers what font I had before? Sans serif? I guess the easy way to find out is to go to the Café workspace or go to my editing workspace or any of my other workspaces and see how they're set. So, preferences. Yeah, sans serif. All right, good. So some of those settings in edit preferences, the ones that relate to the look of the interface, they get remembered from workspace to workspace. So status bar. So yeah, the status bar is where, like, if I click something, it gives you information about it. If I click this clef here, it tells you it's a treble clef in measure 1, beat 1. This can be actually useful information sometimes if you don't know what some symbol is in a score you just got, or yeah, I actually use the status bar quite a bit, but some people don't. So one of the things you can do in your special workspace here is view status bar to turn that off. Now that is a GUI component, not a GUI preference. So because I didn't check the GUI components box, I'm expecting that that setting will now be global. That setting won't be only for my Café. I expect that setting will remain. And if I'm surprised, I'm surprised. So when I switch to advanced, okay, so there we are. I guess it did get remembered. So yeah, some of these things you have to experiment with to see what actually gets remembered and what doesn't. But when I switch back to Café, the status bar now goes away again. So view status bar to bring it back if I want. Now notice something else that changed. My advanced workspace has the inspector is pretty skinny here, as are the palettes. Well, my display is pretty wide, and this is not very useful to me to have the inspector so narrow. I mean, it's so narrow, these palettes, and narrow that I can fit a full-size sheet of paper here, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment, and still have like room to spare. Well, this is kind of a drag though, because when I click this clef now, notice this stuff is cut off. I can't even see my whole inspector here. Or if I select the text item, there's whole buttons here that are not visible. So there's a thing I do when I first set up MuseScore on a new system, or if I have to reset to factory settings. One of the things I do is set an optimum inspector size. Trial and error has told me that dynamics, if I add a dynamic marking to my score, this is about, because different things in the inspector require different widths. For the clef, I'm looking to see, I guess all of them are too narrow here because they pretty much all have that offset setting. But for some things, this is almost wide enough. And the default width of these totally depends on your screen. So it's like you might be seeing something different than this. What I use is dynamics. Dynamics require the most space because of the way their settings are organized. So I enter a dynamic marking, and then I increase the width of, and again, I don't want to do this in advanced. I want to do it in my Café workspace. There's no reason I couldn't do it in my advanced also. But I'm going to make it wide enough until this scroll bar disappears. So once that scroll bar disappears, I know that it's full width now. I get it. So it just disappears. So that's one of the first things that I typically do. Now, all the settings that are needed here. And to be honest, I really couldn't tell you why dynamics requires so much space, because it doesn't really feel like it should. But I think one of these options here, it's all these things under style. I don't even know, because other things have all those same settings too. But in any case, dynamics seem to require as much space as anything else. So if I enter a dynamic marking and then size this accordingly, it all works. I also typically come over to the lines palette, and it's too long right now, only 2 columns wide. So I increase the width of my palette until I can get 3 columns worth in lines. So those are 2 customizations that I do that I like to do. But now if I hit the home button in my score, you see it no longer fits on the page. This score is literally the size of a piece of paper. So I'm going to now hit over here in the toolbar where it says 100%. If I go to page width instead, now it's shrunk it down to fit within that. I can work this way. This screen is wide enough that this still works for me. On your system, if you just do what I did, make the inspector that wide, make the palettes that wide, you probably won't have enough room left over for your score unless you've got a pretty big monitor. But I can work this way, but I can also use the shortcut F8 to just close the inspector. And when I do that, notice now the score has automatically gotten wider to compensate. Now it's really comfortable for me. It's actually bigger than life size. So those are a couple customizations that I do. I also have a shortcut. This command to switch from page width to 100%, that isn't normally a shortcut, but I do that often enough that I defined a shortcut, Control / that switches me back and forth between 100% and page width. 100% is literally the size of a paper. I mean, if I grab a sheet of paper and I hold this thing up to my screen, not that you're going to see this, it is perfect. It is exactly the size. We go out of our way in MuseScore to make that happen. It doesn't always work, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But first, I want to talk about customizing that shortcut. So the way you customize shortcuts is Edit, Preferences, Shortcuts. So the question from Dallin here is, are page settings workspace dependent? No, page settings are score dependent. Different scores have different page settings. So page settings and style settings are all part of your score. They're not part of the workspace, because you wouldn't want every time you change a workspace it to modify your score to make, change your letter size score into A4 or, half size or whatever else. Those settings are all per score. However, you can set defaults that are program-wide. So I'll come back to that in a minute. Remind me if I forget. So here in Edit, Preferences, Shortcuts, or we get at the shortcuts. And so what I did is, let me try View. I don't remember. No, View mode. Zoom. These are all the shortcuts that are available for Zoom. And so zoom in is usually Control+, zoom out is usually Control-. Now you can see I have two shortcuts defined for zoom in, because Control+, plus is usually Shift and equals. And on a lot of keyboards, that just doesn't work. If you try to do Control Shift equals, it thinks Control Shift equals is something different than Control+, and it won't register. So I've just made Control equals be a second shortcut for zoom in. So here is where zoom to 100 is Control 0, zoom to page width or previous magnification is Control \. This is the one I customized. So to customize that one, I clicked where it says define, and then I can click here and define my shortcut. So if I don't want it to be Control \, I really want it to be, Shift \, I can type Shift \. And it tells me, oh, no, that conflicts with something else. So, okay, I'll clear it, click in that box, and try again. The problem is most of the easy shortcuts are already taken. That's one reason I picked Control \. So anyhow, I would type Control \, and it goes, yeah, you can use that one. And then you just say either replace if you want to replace what was there before, or add if you want to have multiple shortcuts. So then you would hit replace here to replace the original shortcut with your new shortcut. But I'm going to hit cancel because I really don't want to change anything. So you can customize all sorts of shortcuts here. And I do that all the time. Well, I try to live with the default shortcuts to make my life easier in explaining things to other people, but my life isn't just explaining things. I use MuseScore also, right? So I wanted to define some things that would work for me. So things like that I needed to do. Some shortcuts I just really couldn't remember the way they were, and so I entered my own version of. Some shortcuts, though, there's just commands that just don't have shortcuts by default. Like here we can see add 16th grace note doesn't have a shortcut. Add brackets to accidental doesn't have a shortcut. Add composer text doesn't have one. So all sorts of commands are available for you to customize, but they don't have shortcuts by default. So Yeah, you could, oh, look at that, explode. I thought, no, I defined a shortcut for implode at one point. There it is, control semicolon. But I've never defined one for explode because I guess I don't use that one enough. But let's go ahead and do that. I'll hit define, and then I'll try, I don't know, if control semicolon, how about control shift semicolon? All right, that's going to be my shortcut for explode now. There we go. So which status bar indicated which dynamics affected note? Yeah, true. That's not, that information isn't available. You can, yeah, you'd have to hunt backwards for it. So that's a reasonable request, and it seems to me that's been discussed before. I don't know if any work has been done on that already, but yeah, because if you have a note here, you want to just be able to click a note and say, what dynamic is that note at, without having to like hunt backwards through the score to find your dynamic marking. Yeah, I sympathize with that. So that would be interesting information to have in the status bar. So, getting back to what Dallin asked about page size, and I want to mention this, that on my system, so MuseScore by default will try to figure out what page size you want based on the default printer installed on your system. So if your default printer defaults to letter size paper, MuseScore will default to letter for pages. If your default printer defaults to A4 size paper, then MuseScore will default to A4. If your default printer is a label printer that prints little address labels, then your default score size in MuseScore is going to be label sized. So it uses that. So that system generally works, but it fails sometimes, like if you have a label printer or some other weird printer set up as your default printer. And if you didn't set up a default printer, usually like Windows, most operating systems will set one up for you that's like a PDF printer or something with a reasonable page size. But there are situations where it doesn't work, and Linux is one of those. On Linux systems, that idea of checking your default printer for the default page size doesn't typically work. And I think it's because Linux has multiple ways of doing that. There's different ways of setting up printers on Linux so that it's, all customizable and all, which is all well and good, but it means that MuseScore's method of checking your default printer fails. So I have a customization that I remembered to do just this morning. I got this computer a couple days ago. I set most of it up then, but I just remembered one this morning. So I'm going to go to Edit, Preferences, and then under Score. You see here, this file here, under Style, Home, Marc Sabatella, Documents, MuseScore 3, Styles, Letter Score. So this file here, letterscore.mss. Let me open that file so you can see what it actually is. So that's under MuseScore 3 under Styles, and it's called letterscore.mss. This file has in it just the settings for page size to force MuseScore to be letter sized. So every new score I create will now, because this is my default style, will have letter size score. Unless I'm using a template that picks a different size, in which case it'll use that size. But by default, most of my new scores will be letter size because I set up that customization. Now, I didn't type all of this into MuseScore. The way you create a style file normally is you set up a score the way you want. Like say you create a score and you've set this thing up. I'll set it up using the treble template. The piano roll will show the velocity. That's great to know, Jim. Yeah, that's clever. Clever. I like it. Okay, so I have my score that's letter size, but what if I want to create a style so that I can quickly turn scores from letters, to make some customization? What I'm going to do is I'm going to make that change first. I'm going to go to Format, Page Settings, and then maybe I want it to be, is there a, I can't even remember. There's a name for the choral style, ottavo. Is that one of the choices in this drop down? looks like no, there's nothing starting with an O. I'm typing O in here. Oh, I haven't set up my little, oh, I did set it up. I just haven't turned it on. So you can see my characters as I'm typing. Atavo is 7 by 10. There's variations on it, but 7 wide by 10 tall inches. I don't know how Europeans do it or the rest of the world, but in the United States, 7 inches by 10 inches is a common size for choral scores. So I now have my score set up that size, and for that matter, maybe I don't want it to be, let me go back to the style dialog. I don't want it to be this, now I'll go back to millimeters. I don't want it to be this 1.753 millimeters or whatever this is. I want it to be a little smaller. Choral scores can go smaller. I'll make it 1.4 millimeters. So now this is maybe a reasonable, that might be too much, actually. That might be too small. I don't know. Well, let me view it full size. I feel that's too small. So I don't know what's actually common in the choral world. I know it's a little smaller. I'll make it 1.5. And yes, you can't type into this field here unless you select a character first and then type over it. Bug that's been around in this dialogue for years. No one's gotten around to fixing it except one person who fixed it by like changing everything, and so that wasn't accepted. We wanted a fix that just fixed that. Anyhow, 1.5. This is now reasonable. So if I want a style file that I can then either set as my default or apply to other scores, I'll go to Format, Save Style. And now I can say Atavo.mss. Sometimes it puts in the .mss by itself. Sometimes you have to type it. I'm not going to trust it. I'm just going to type it. So now I can take any old score I want, like this score here, and I can load that Atavo format, and boom, now it's Atavo format. It got smaller. I don't know how easily you could tell that, but if I go to page settings, there's the custom size, there's the 1.5. And then if I want to use that as a default style, I can make that be the default style for in Edit Preferences score. So that was one of the customizations that I did. I loaded that letter. So that letter one didn't have anything else. It only had the page size related settings. And the way I did that was I actually edited the file. So I can go into atavo.mss here and just delete everything else. Delete all this other stuff that's not important. Delete. I just select all this other crap here. And delete everything other than the things that are related to page and spatium. Spatium, I don't know. That's Latin for staff space. It's I don't know if that's literally Latin for staff space, but it's a Latin sounding word meaning the size of the staff space, 1.5 millimeters. So this could then be a style file that keeps all my other style settings at whatever their other defaults already were, but then lets you load this in. So that's another customization that you can do. Create style files, load style files into existing scores, or set a particular style file to be the default for all new scores. And that's what I did with that letter thing. So let me go back and talk about the fact that when I held up a sheet of paper, let me undo those changes here. I said that when I held up a sheet of paper here, you're going to have to trust me on this. I take my sheet of letter size paper and I hold it up to this screen and it's matching perfectly. Unfortunately, that didn't happen by default. MuseScore tries to make that work by default, where everything is sized perfectly. And also, for that matter, if I take an actual ruler and I measure the size of the icons on the toolbar, they should be the same no matter how big your monitor is. MuseScore tries to make that happen. It also tries to do things like, here is a time signature in my score. If I go to so this score is life size, right? It's the same size as a piece of paper. If I then come to the time signatures palette, this time signature here is supposed to be the same size as it is in the score, except that this palette has actually been customized. Well, not customized, really. It's been set to only display at 80% of the standard size. Some palettes display at standard size, some display at not standard size. But for any palette that's set at standard size, it should literally be, your palette icons should be the same size as something in a score, if your score is displayed at 100% like this. So MuseScore tries to get all that right, but it doesn't always work. Let me show you what MuseScore would have looked like if I hadn't done a little customization here. Can I do that easily? Yes, I can. Dot local bin MScore. Okay, this is what it will look like if I don't do the special customization that I did. Notice, hopefully, that my score is a lot smaller than it was before. Hopefully you can see that no matter how big your monitor is. And I'm telling you, if I put my hold a piece of paper up here, I can tell it's smaller, and all the icons are smaller and the palette smaller. Everything's too small. That's because this is a high resolution display that Linux and Chrome OS are fighting over how to transmit that information to MuseScore. Windows has the same problem. My Windows machine has a similar problem. Macs often get it right, but not always, especially if you try to connect a non-traditional device, like try to use a TV set as a display. You may well find your icons too big or too small. That's a pretty common problem, and we do provide a couple of ways of fixing that. And the way that I'm using here is it's a command line option. So here is the command line that starts MuseScore -D, and then whatever the magic number is, -D tells MuseScore what is the DPI, the dots per inch of your monitor. So you would have to either know that from looking at the spec sheet for your monitor, or do some trial and error, which is frankly what I did. I just kept plugging in numbers until the paper matched. And the answer is it's 158. So if I put in -D 158 when I started on the command line, now everything is the right size. Now, I don't start it from the command line all the time. I normally don't start it from the command line. Usually I just click my little icon here. But all operating systems give you ways of customizing that. What happens when you click that icon? Somewhere in the properties for that icon is the command line, and you just add -D, capital D, followed by a number. That is the actual resolution of your screen, and then things will display at the right size. So that's another customization that you don't always have to do, but you might depending on your monitor. So those are some customizations that I set up. Oh, and by the way, those keyboard shortcuts there, edit, preferences, shortcuts, you can also save that set of shortcuts. When you hit the save button, it'll save a file anywhere you like. And then you can just copy that file over to another computer, which is what I did, so that all my shortcuts on this system are the same as they were on my other system that I had nicely, carefully customized. So once you've customized shortcuts the way you want, you can save that as a file and then, use it on another computer also. So that's kind of nice. So I want to show what I did with the toolbar, and I want to show palette customization. Those are like the other customizations that I've shown those before, but these are worth showing again. So what did I do to get my toolbars to be simpler? Well, what I'm going to do is View, Toolbars, Customize. And what I want to do is remove all those node input icons. So here's it shows me, it lets me customize the node input toolbar, or the file toolbar, or the playback toolbar. Those are the three toolbars I can customize. So I'm going to come to the node input toolbar here, and I'm just going to make it a little bigger. It's showing me here is what is on the toolbar now. Here are the buttons that are available to add to the toolbar but aren't there now. So if your toolbar doesn't have enough stuff on it, like you really want a 256th note, you can add it. Click 256th note and then click the left arrow here, and boom, it gets added. It got added at the end there because I didn't select something first. So let me click this and hit the right arrow now to send it back. This time I'm going to select where I want it. I would want it, say, I don't know if it's going to add it before or after, but we're about to find out. I'm going to select, I think it added, since it went to the end of the list, I'm going to guess after. So I'm going to select the node input icon here, and then 256, and then hit this left arrow. Up, it actually went in front. But that's okay. Now I can select this thing and hit the down arrow to move it down. So now I can have more icons on that toolbar. But I don't want more icons. And there's only so many icons available. There's not that many additional ones. I don't think there's any available for file operations. For playback controls, you can add a count-in icon if you want. And I think I did that on mine. I actually want fewer. So I'm going to remove all these things. Boom, bye-bye to all of those duration ones. Bye-bye to the... Do I want to get rid of the... Yeah, because I never use double dots. I'm going to get rid of all those. I'll get rid of the tie, separator, rest. I don't need any of those things. I don't need the flip duration. But maybe I'll keep the voice icons this time. I have now customized the note input toolbar. I can come to the file operations, and I don't need most of these. I don't need any of these. I actually don't need the file operations toolbar at all. I'd like to just be able to hide it. So I'm going to hit OK. And what I want to do, now notice how my note input icon got a lot simpler. I can now actually get rid of the entire file operations toolbar, except what we're going to see is that this doesn't quite work the way you want. If I get rid of it, notice it got rid of not just those file icons, but it got rid of those drop-down icons, those drop-down menus for changing from page view to continue view, or the zoom buttons. I didn't want to get rid of those, but unfortunately, I had no choice. They go away when the file toolbar goes away. So what I discovered is the way to do this then is to come back to, well, first of all, bring that toolbar back, file operations toolbar back. And now what I'm going to do is view, toolbars, customize, and I'm just going to remove all this stuff because this is the stuff I don't want. New, open, save, save online, print, undo, redo. I got shortcuts for all those, or I can just go to the menu for things like save online. Actually, save online, maybe I'll keep save online. That feels like the rest of these, I just use shortcuts. Control N, Control O, Control S, Control P, Control Z, Shift Control Z, right? Those are all standard shortcuts. But save online, that's worth keeping. So I'll keep save online and those guys. So now I've got enough room to work with here. But what I wanted to do was get all this on one row. So you can also just, if I go to the left of the toolbar, you see that the cursor turned into this little kind of crosshair. That lets me then drag it if I'm careful enough. Maybe I have to double click and drag. Sometimes it's a little finicky, and I'm not used to this touchpad yet, but there it is. So when you drag it, you'll see that you can either add it somewhere within, like I can add it at the beginning of this toolbar here. That feels like a good place for it. So now it's there on that toolbar. There's still space for the toolbar below because that's where the Workspace button is. Well, I want to add the Workspace button up here, but first I want to get rid of this feedback button. I'm never going to use that, right? I'm the one who would be looking at that feedback, or one of the people who might be looking at that feedback. So I'm right-clicking here within the toolbar, and I want to just turn off the feedback toolbar. And now I can grab this Workspace doohickey and drag it into that space. What I've learned through experience is the handle to drag it isn't here. It's way the heck over here. But when I do that, I will be able to drag it, and it gets skinny, and then I can drag it in here, and now it's there. So now I have this set up more or less the way my editing toolbar was set up. It's got just the icons I want. Oh, I want to add the count-in toolbar. Let's go to View, Toolbars, Customize Toolbars, and Playback Controls. Let's add that count-in. And yeah, sure enough, right next to the metronome, that's a fine place for it. So, and because I got a wide enough screen, I have room for all that. If your screen isn't wide enough, you might not be able to get all of those buttons in on one row, and then you'd have to decide what you need to sacrifice to make that happen, or if that's a goal that you want to achieve. I could save a lot of room by removing those voice buttons because I never need them. I know those shortcuts. So anyhow, that's how you customize toolbars. And then finally, we have palette customizations. Well, I don't know about finally. I'll probably think of something else. There's all sorts of palette customizations that I've done. The simplest one is to get rid of the stuff you know you'll never need. I'm never going to use this thing. Soft, tenuto, staccato, accent. I never use any of these things. So you can click it and then hit delete. Bye, 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 bye. What is this, fade in? Nope, that looks like a crescendo, but it's not. It's a fade in. Bye, bye, bye. Sawtooth, nope. Bye, bye. Vibrato, nope. Bye, bye. Now we're getting to ones I might use. What are these stupid fermatas? No, not going to use those. Click, bye, 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 bye. Now I've got a more useful articulations palette. It doesn't take up so much space. I should actually do that on my editing one. I don't remember if I did. Now, you might wonder, well, what if you ever need those? Relax. I don't have to switch workspaces to get back. I just click the More button here. And they're all there. They're all there under More, but they don't take up space. So you can remove things from palettes nice and easily. You can also move things around easily. Like if I've decided that I would rather have the accent staccato next to the staccato, just drag it there. Boom, now it's there. And the marcato next to the marcato staccato next to that, right? All the marcato variations next to each other, right? This one next to that one. You can just rearrange them here on the palette. But you can also do this thing that I did, is I added a palette that I call layout. And actually this is, oh, by the way, there's an accordion palette and a bagpipe palette that aren't there in the advanced workspace, but you can add them. But I'm going to create a custom palette, and I'm going to call it Layout. And I believe that is now a default palette in MuseScore 4, but I haven't really checked to see what's in it. I like having a layout palette that has the things that I use a lot for layout, such as breaks. I'm struggling to actually work this touchpad on this thing is a little finicky, but I'm getting used to it. There we go. And I'm just dragging in my breaks. I don't think I can drag multiple ones together, but I'm going to try it. Click, shift click. Can I drag all three of these together? That would be kind of nice. Yeah, I'm struggling just to do the drag at all. So yeah, it's just doing one at a time. But in any case, I add those things to my palette. Yeah, this is kind of an awkward touchpad. It's like one of the few things that I'm not liking on this particular new computer here. But one of the other things you can do is say, you know what, I want this layout palette to be down here. Now I don't have to drag as far. I just drag the whole palette, and then I can drag it back up when I'm done. Frames and measures are the other things. I want my frames on that same palette. Frame, frame, frame. I'm never going to use that measure button, so I don't need that. And now I can drag that palette back up to the top where it's nice and easy for me. So these are things that I put on my layout palette. I don't use this thing over here, this thing that looks like I don't know what it looks like to you, but it's just a staff. This is something you can add to your score and then click on it and then go over to the inspector. Let me F8 to open the inspector to change the staff type at that point in the score. So you see this is a regular normal staff, but if I've added this staff type change, and now I can say, now I want it to be just a one-line staff. And so you can change from 5 lines to 1 line in the middle of your score. And you can change all these other settings that you see also. I don't use that much, but I use it enough. It's certainly not text. I have no idea why it ever ended up in the text palette and why no one thought to change that or fix that. But you can then add this to your layout palette here. You can also add elements from your score. So if you have a particular customized thing, like, I don't know, I've added some text and giving it a yellow background, which is, I have a separate annotations palette that I normally use, but I'm just for now, I'm just going to put this on my layout palette. If I select this text here and I want it to have a yellow background, which is something you might want to know how to do, you'll come over here to the inspector. You'll say you want a frame and you want it rectangular. And then you'll tell it, oh, by the way, that frame, I want it to not actually be visible. So in other words, I don't want this actual rectangle to show. So I'll say that I want the thickness of the frame itself to be 0, but I'm going to come to where it says highlight color here, and you'll see it looks like nothing. That's because it's transparent. But I'm going to click there, and I'll change it to yellow. And when I do that, nothing looks like it happened. Well, that's because it's transparent. Whether it's yellow or anything else, it's still transparent. So what I got to do here is make it less transparent. And on this computer, it's called alpha channel. Different on Linux, I guess it's called alpha channel. On Windows, it might be called opacity. I'm not really sure, but you want to change this value. So if I go up, I think the maximum is 255. That's completely opaque. If I make it 127, that's like splitting the difference. Now you can see it's kind of translucent. You can see through it. It's yellow, but you can see things through it. It's kind of like a yellow highlighter. So anyhow, I've created my text. I've made it transparent yellow background or translucent yellow background. Now I want to add this to that palette. I'll Control-Shift drag from the score into the palette. And now I've got that yellow text right there in the palette. And now I can easily add yellow text to my score by selecting something in my score, clicking that, and then, double clicking it to say what I really want. So, in using 2 monitors, MuseScore isn't optimized for that. That's all I can say. So I don't know of a way offhand to pull that off, but what I can say is MuseScore 4 will actually put different scores in different windows, and so then you can move a score with no controls into one window and have all the controls in the other, but some of the controls will go with the score, so to be honest, I don't really know. In MuseScore as it is, what I would recommend trying is making your window really, really wide, but getting all the controls off to the left. And then setting up MuseScore, setting up your multiple monitors to extend the display, right? So that way, if you have a real wide window, it starts off on one and then moves to the other. In principle, that would allow you to get all your controls on one display, and then the score itself would show on the other. But, you'd have to do some trial and error to get it to be exactly right. So there's just enough room on the first monitor for the controls, and everything else is, it'd be kind of wonky, but you could probably pull it off. I've never tried, so I guess I don't really know how viable that is, but it's that's how I would try it anyhow. I would set the second display to extend the first display as opposed to giving me a second display. All right. I've talked about a lot of different things here. There's other customizations possible for sure. I didn't show you every single shortcut that I do. I showed you the idea of customizing shortcuts. I didn't show you every single toolbar customization you can do. I showed you the idea and one way of doing it. I showed you how you can create custom palettes, move them around, how you can customize the width of things. You could also say, if you want the inspector to not show at all as part of this workspace, just close it. And then when you switch workspaces, it comes back. And when you come to this workspace, it goes away if you checked the GUI components checkbox when you created the workspace. So there's a lot of these customizations you can do to help you work more efficiently. And again, if I go to my editing workspace, it is set up to be efficient for me in that my inspector is nice and wide, so that I can access everything I need in it, but it's so wide that it takes up a lot of space, and that's okay because I know I can close it by hitting F8. So I work with the inspector closed a lot, and then I just reopen it when I want with F8. Similarly, the palettes I've customized. I have my layouts palette. You can see those things there. I also added a breath mark to that palette because I thought that would be useful. And I added the repeat bar lines and some double bars and some other miscellaneous things. Oh, Dennis, you got the playback on the bottom? Great. glad to hear that's useful for you. So yeah, I've got that palette. I've got this annotations palette over here where I added a whole lot of symbols that I used in creating like educational worksheets and things. And so there's my highlighted text, but I also have just individual characters that came off the special characters palette. So just individual numbers. This is a superscripted 6 that I can easily add to text. Title, and then click that little 6. And there's a superscripted 6. I had added that, and I got that from the special characters palette. If you've never seen that before, F2. So here are all special characters. These are a bunch of common ones, but then there's a bunch more musical symbols here, a bunch of Unicode symbols there. We'll talk about symbols in a future episode. But you can just drag things from, these are all sorts of crazy accidentals. You can drag things from this palette into this palette also, and that's how I did that. So I've got this nicely customized set of palettes here as part of my workspace, and obviously I didn't remove all these clefs and things that I never use, and I think I'm going to do that next to streamline this. So that's my next task. All right, so I've showed you a bunch of stuff, and hopefully you find that useful. So tomorrow, Music Masterclass, as I announced in my newsletter, I am moving. Assuming that everything works and nothing goes wrong, come to the Mastering MuseScore community, and then that is where the masterclass will take place. I will see if I can get it to simultaneously broadcast to YouTube, but you won't be able to do the chat from there, or I won't be able to see it if you do. So come to the Mastering MuseScore community for the masterclass tomorrow and in the future. And it's going to be really cool because it's going to allow me to easily bring people on board to have conversations with as I'm looking at your music. Really looking forward to the things that is going to make possible. So let me load my Café music and play myself out. Play myself out a little more quietly so you can hear me talk. All right, thanks everyone for being here for the MuseScore Café, as I've been talking about, again, my favorite customizations. And yeah, I talked about a ton of stuff, and I know that I go sometimes too fast to really absorb it, but you can watch it over and over again, right? So you can come back anytime you want and rewatch it and find out, how did I do this thing, or how did I do that thing? I can't remember. So I do this every Wednesday, some version of this sort of thing of talking about some aspect of MuseScore. Next week, if I'm doing my math right, is the first week of the month. That means it's an Ask Me Anything session. So feel free to ask me anything you want. Come over to the community. If there's something that I need to look at your score to answer, then post your score to the community, and then I can look at it. So have that in mind, and I'll send out notification about that before next week. So next week will be the Ask Me Anything session. Also, again, I still don't have details, and it's beginning to make me a little nervous, I have to say, but next week, next Thursday, I'm planning to do a workshop, free workshop on creating great chord progressions. So I will send the information when I have it, assuming everything still goes according to plan. So if you're not already signed up for my newsletter, go ahead and click the link at the top of the chat, which I realize now I never did pin, so it's not at the top of the chat, but you can find it anyhow, right? You know how to find me, so I'm not going to worry about it. And yeah, just sign up for my newsletter if you haven't already, and I look forward to seeing people in the Music Masterclass and telling you more about my workshop then, hopefully, and or telling you about it in the in my newsletter. But one way or another, next Thursday, like an hour or two after the masterclass, I'll be doing a workshop.